And we are a go. So welcome back, guys. It's episode number, who knows? I haven't decided what the numbers are, but I'm back for another one. So today I am super stoked and excited to chat to, I'm going to say, my friend Emily Hightower, who I've been chatting to for probably about a year now, probably about a year on and off via Instagram. And I'm just going to throw it over to her to introduce herself, and then we can dive in a bit deeper from there. So thanks for so much for doing this, Emily.
Yeah, Wibbs, I'm so honored to get to be part of this. Any chance to connect to you? I feel like we're such kindred spirits, and amazing to find you through the Instagram world. A guy, you
The best thing
and
for
Jen,
Instagram.
giant dogs and vans and freedom.
Yeah. So you know, your whole background then, how obviously you are, I mean, what would you class yourself as these days? A yoga teacher and a breathwork coach, or what would you say your title would you, I mean, it's always difficult, I know, but that's my problem.
It is. Like I was calling myself a resilience coach for a while. And then, the anti-fragile movement came out and I dug it. I understood that. But really what I do coach people to do is tap into their own physiology, to use intrinsic skills, to manage their own state and mindset and life. So I've studied all kinds of different processes in the body that people can engage with and participate with, to change how their life turns out,
Amazing.
Yeah, so breath work, nutrition, somatic movement, yoga, and a lot of trauma informed healing or resilience informed would be a more positive spin.
Nice. Yeah. I definitely want to dive into that at some point. Looks like Douglas might go to bed in a minute. So yeah, obviously, I reckon I want to kind of dive into, you mentioned there about helping people use their physiology to perhaps understand their situations, their state, as you kind of said, which I want to dive into in a minute. And I'd kind of like to get into some of the weeds on some of that stuff as well. But just
Yeah.
before we do that, like, how did your journey start? Obviously, I remember I've heard you kind of say, maybe on a podcast, or I think you were chatting to Brian Mackenzie about it, but you were saying that you started your yoga practice and you were more like a Ashtanga side of things.
I was,
And
yeah.
then,
My teacher studied in Mysore with Batabi Joyce and was like
mhm,
one of the original kind of melding it into vinyasa. But that yoga for me started when I was 15 or 16, when I was
right.
going through a lot of trauma in my own personal life. And it was a place that I discovered freedom from the noise in my head, being a real at-risk teen. I was self-conscious. I didn't understand the instructions. I took them personally, like I was doing something wrong. And then all of a sudden something clicked and I felt like, oh, I'm actually in my body instead of in my head. And it's not like I took it from that age forward. I dropped the ball on it for a while, but there was a seed planted. In my 20s, I explored mountain medicine. I went into ambulance work for 5 years.
Amazing.
That was my kind of medical background. It's limited, but it exposed me a lot to the human body's capacities to deal with acute trauma and the mindset involved with acute pain and trauma. And then in the summers, I would cruise off and river guide all over the place and teach people how to
Honestly,
hold their breath.
honestly, you Canadians, I'm sure I've said, but I spent 3 winters in Canada, in BC, and I've got numerous friends who their life is basically winter, either ski school teaching or mountain sort of ski patrol, and then in the summer they just do what you did and they go kayaking, so whitewater rafting and guide, that kind of stuff. And it's like, oh,
Yeah, well, I'm
you
not.
Canadians have it rough.
I'm a U.S. girl.
Oh,
I
yeah. Of
love
course you
Canada.
are. Sorry, of course you are. Colorado. I don't know what I'm
That's okay.
saying.
I take that as a compliment. I lived in Red Mountain, British Columbia for a winter, and I met a lot of those kids that, man, they have it wired. They actually would go tree planting in the
Yes. Yeah.
and that's hard work, right? They'd make a bucket of cash,
Yeah.
then get fired because it's seasonal, and they
Yeah.
plant unemployment and go make cash money while they skied
Yeah.
these blissful resorts. So I'm on to their jam, but
Yeah, man,
I'm
it's the way life should
all
be.
the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. And so, you know, with your, I guess you're playing around with yoga and stuff. Did you, and I know it's so, especially in this day and age of yoga, obviously, you know, I've been teaching now for 7 odd years and playing around for 15, 16 odd years with it. But, you know, it's very much like a physical practice, which is all kind of, it's all good. And that's it has an amazing benefit. But then we are both now looking at the world very like through a very strong kind of breath centric vision. Did you practice much pranayamas? But obviously I know that, you know, an Ashtanga background doesn't necessarily dive into a lot of pranayama outside of perhaps just like a strong ujjayi.
Yeah.
But was there seeds planted in that which kind of led you, or was it just the quietening of the brain, of your mind, then allowed you to find some space to then explore these other bits? Or what led you into the kind of
Such a journey. That's a great question. My teacher, Deborah Cohen, had been teaching for 30 plus years when I started working with her. That might be an exaggeration, at least 25 years at that time. And so, yes, she had an Ashtanga background. She lived and studied with Pattabhi Jois in Mysore, but she also, in around 2001, handed me this pranayama torch. We studied at her Halikai retreat in Hawaii, and her style resonated with me because she and her husband were avid outdoors people. He was a Patagonia photographer who would get sent all over the world with a bucket of clothes, and he would, you know, bring Deborah and their single only child daughter with them to Nepal, to Peru, to Hawaii, to Colorado. So she would do these kind of deep dive yoga retreats while he was photographing people in Patagonia clothes. Remember getting those catalogs, and you would like, in the 80s and 90s, there was no internet like this, you know. That was where we got our graphic
yes, totally,
mountain porn. So long story short, Deborah had a lot of rich pranayama training outside of her original Ashtanga stuff.
nice.
And when she handed me some of the practices that I've kind of evolved in my work, it was given with this deep understanding that, like, this is playing with people's nervous systems. And you need to understand how it works in your body first before you teach it. So
love that.
That helped me. Really lovely teacher. And I was able, through her guidance and my own body's guidance, to unravel decades of buried trauma, with the support of not only breath, but her anchoring it in a way that I could actually transmute. And that's ongoing, right? It's not a linear path.
No.
But yeah, so that's kind of the roots. And then from there, my yoga just evolved into wanting to share it with people who could use it.
Yeah, I love that. Like we said, I think that's something which, you know, I've been asked by numerous people these days to, you know, when you're going to do a training, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I always try and say to them, like, well, for one, you need to like do this yourself. I mean, it's all very, you know, it's all very well coming and doing my classes, but I actually want you to, if you were to do a training, you've got to have like a practice where you put in this stuff in your own way, in your own time, you feel it and experience it. And I think what she said is playing with people's nervous systems is so good. Like, that's such I think a misunderstood idea of like breath and even physical practice. Do you know what I mean? There's definitely a misunderstanding of the amount of people who think you do a yoga practice and you can't hurt yourself because it's yoga. And
right.
you know, and you're kind of like, well, if you're doing a really strong physical practice, you're, you know, expecting an awful lot of your body's nervous systems to be able to respond to what you're giving it. And if you are not in a good place that day or that week or whatever, you're going to be fucking with your nervous system, and like it's going to bite back and not let you do something. And that's when it's kind of the injuries happen. I guess.
Yeah. Some of them are psychological. Some
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
them, and those edges are everybody's to play with. It's I love that kind of torch metaphor, because it's really handing the light over to somebody else to say, I don't know what's best for you. I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to heal you. This is what I currently understand about breath work, the human nervous system, the body, this particular lineage of practice. Here's some tools to get you started. Come back and tell me what you learn. Like,
Yeah.
I have learned so much more from the people that I've shared these practices with than from my own body. Even it's like, that's the gift. And yeah, and your practice just really inspires me, watching you share it so well, so selflessly. I love how you and Jen both just like put it out there, which has been really new for me to do. I'm much more private in my teaching until
It's
working here with Shift.
it is a funny one. I mean, I guess, I've kind of always been fortunate that I'm one of those kind of extroverted, slightly cocky bastards. But it's, the more I've kind of done it, the more I've kind of realized that actually the world of social media is a very weird one. And if there's one thing we can actually give to people is what I feel we should be doing, is like what I learn from my own practice in my own body is perhaps it might help inspire. I'm going to say inspire, that might be a strong word, but inspire someone to explore their own edges and their own understandings of their own body. And perhaps some of those words, those videos, those bits might plant a seed for them to dive off of, I guess. But
It totally does. And it comes
I mean,
across that way. It's very authentic and honest and raw and real. And
I
I
definitely
respect
think Jen's got that. I mean, Jen and I were chatting, and I'm sure she's not going to mind because she puts it all on social media anyway. But I think it's pretty amazing, like Jen's journey of, like, even from since she's been working with you, of unraveling and actually being really open and honest with it, and the amount of people who respond to that, because I don't think people are used to people being so open, honest, raw about their feelings, their emotions, their fears, traumas, whatever else, and how they are using a practice to work through it. And I think that's actually one of the best things. And I kind of tell Jen, I'm almost quite jealous. I'm not jealous of, she's been through what she has, but her journey of how she's doing it is amazing. And it's such a kind of inspiration to see people respond so deeply to it, and actually kind of, that's pretty amazing.
that too. Well, she's, again, authentic and warm and honest and
Yeah.
raw. And it's a beautiful opportunity to connect the
Yeah.
dots, and let the rest fall away.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So with this, as we kind of chatting nervous systems and whatever else, now I don't really know who's going to listen to this, in all fairness, and we'll kind of, perhaps for the first few episodes, not go too crazy straight away, but like, can you just try and give people a little overview of quite what, when we say we're playing with people's nervous systems, if you do a pranayama practice, if you do a breathwork practice, if you do a yoga practice, whatever, meditation, even, all of that stuff, it's everything is playing with our nervous system. But from your perspective, like, how does that sit? What do you mean when you say that? Just so people have an idea.
Deep question, Wibbs.
Yeah, I know. It's all right. You're not in any rush, are you?
I don't know if that's a soft lob or a drill, but at its essence, and this might sound so simple, but this is the essential truth of it, right? Breath automatically follows the brain. Usually, it doesn't require our participation or our voluntary effort. It's going to follow metabolic demands or psychological demands. Meaning, if we're afraid, we're going to breathe faster. Our CO2 sensor fire alarm pulls, and it changes our breath rate. So whether you're running up a hill or afraid of something that you've just seen, a sound, a bump in the night, your breath is following the nervous system. Now, when you override that with voluntary breath control of any nature, you are now breathing in a way that affects your entire metabolic system and nervous system, right? So you're no longer just breathing in response to metabolic demands or psychological demands. You're imposing your will on that breath, which means that you're either going to be creating, like in the skill of stress, I talk about the elements of breath, the inhale being sympathetic in nature, focusing, arousing, awakening, heart beats faster on the inhale. Exhale, deactivating, calming, pauses, intentional voluntary pauses, creating that prefrontal cortex, calm, voluntary control. A little different than breath holding, which pushes the edges of your tolerance, right? But all of these voluntary imposed patterns on the breathing have direct implications in the way that you sense and feel, and direct patterning. How we breathe is how we start to think and feel, right? So if you're over breathing all day, just autonomically without any thought to it, you're going to pattern anxiety. If you try to affect that through deep pranayama practices that create over breathing, it's not going to make you feel better, right?
Yeah.
You're actually
Yeah,
pushing on those windows of tolerance. You're either pushing on the recovery end to deepen your energy reserves, or you're pushing on the upper edge to widen your tolerance to stress. And if you mismanage those edges, you can actually diminish your window of tolerance and create more room for living in the margins of anxiety, depression, avoidance. Yeah.
Perfect. I love that. I know I was kind of chatting with you prior, like sort of yesterday. I've been having a discussion, shall we say, on an Instagram post from the Health and Human Performance Foundation post around hyperventilating and hyperventilation. And essentially the paper was saying hyperventilation in a chronic state is a bad thing, and here's why, which was, we all kind of, that's kind of, we understand. Hopefully most people do. If you don't, then go look it up, or come just look at all my Instagram posts, all I post about, or Emily's. But we understand that chronic hyperventilation is a bad thing. And so that's what the whole article was about. And then some chap popped up on there and said, well, yeah, that's all true, but we can't forget that, deliberate hyperventilation can also be an amazing tool for trauma recovery and bits and pieces. I might be getting those words a bit wrong, but that's pretty much what he was saying. And then I kind of decided to reply, because I was feeling like that, kind of in that mood, and I wrote a bit of an essay,
mixing it up.
Yeah, pretty much. I do find it's a really good way to challenge my knowledge and make sure I do actually understand what I think. But anyway, so I kind of dived in and I explained how, as a nurse, and my experience of using, because I used to use breath work in A&E for people who were kind of couldn't settle, you're trying to get a cannula in, you're trying to get bloods, anything like this. I would use breath work, cool, calming, slow breath work, and you'd get them into a much more parasympathetic state, and it would give you, as you've kind of said, the headroom to then allow you to get on with what you need to do.
Yeah,
and so I went in,
training ground in the world, right?
Exactly.
Acute medical needs, you learn really quickly how to help somebody breathe.
It's so important. It's so important. Unfortunately, I do think that there's a lack of understanding within the NHS, which is obviously one of the reasons why I left being a nurse. But I kind of went into this whole thing, and then he replied, and basically, and I said that there was a place and a time for hyperventilation practices. And I practice them myself sometimes, not a lot, I will be honest, but I do use them at times when I feel I need them. But I said the problem is there's too many people seeing that it's really fucking cool on Instagram, doing Wim Hof breathing. People, I don't know if I'll get in trouble with Wim Hof people. I'm sure some of them will disagree if they listen to this. But Wim Hof, whatever other, whether it be Sudarshan Kriyas or whether it be, I don't know, Sam Skelly, I've kind of, as a name I've heard banded about of late, and all these practices which are really sympathetic driving practices. And basically I said there's a time and place in it, but for most people in society right now, it's the last thing they really need, is we actually need to be able to deal with the physiological problems, i.e. overbreathing, kind of poor kind of barrier reflex sensitivity, poor kind of chemoreceptor sensitivity, all of these bits and pieces that needs to be sorted out first. And we need to be able to allow a body to have room of adaptation to then chuck in something perhaps stronger and whatever else.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's a sharp tool. It's a sharp blade.
I got it, and I got an answer back, basically something along the lines of that I was being irresponsible with like this post, because actually hyperventilation is an amazing tool for like unblocking past traumas and letting things go and resetting the body and all this kind of stuff, which we said at the beginning we wanted to get into physiology of stuff. And so my reply has been, let's talk physiology, essentially.
Fantastic, right?
Because
not getting attached to a certain practice is really important, and not getting attached to your breakthrough as something that everybody else needs to experience.
Yeah.
The understanding physiology first, which I love David Bidler's name of his company for that reason, right? Physiology first. Let's start there. Like, this isn't about a certain method being the answer. This is about some principles that underlie all human beings' nervous systems and how breath impacts that. Now, this guy might have some amazing experience to share. Good on him. That's fantastic. And Wim Hof, I love that guy.
Yeah, he's a maniac. I love it.
He's amazing, and he's done a lot of good. But it is time now that breath is at this tipping point. It is time to back up and make sure that all of us are remembering to learn. Keep learning from each other. Keep understanding what's at the root of this. Because experientially, I have stories every week, literally almost every week, from people who have had very negative responses to super hyperventilation practices like the ones that you mentioned. And I've also heard lots of cool stories about these breakthroughs, but from my experience personally, and in 20 years of working with people who've had chronic states of anxiety, a lot of it rooted in childhood trauma or combat trauma with veterans or frontlines workers. In our physiology, that diaphragm, it's a bracing muscle, right? It is a primary bracing muscle. Before it's used for respiration, it will brace. So there are a lot of people out there walking around over breathing with a braced diaphragm unconsciously. That muscle is bracing for suspected impact. It's trained to feel on alert all the time. And so this chicken and egg thing starts to happen where they're over breathing. That causes you to see the world through a lens of sympathetic chronic stress. And then it cascades from there, right? You start to carve. Like, I've got a guy who reached out to me who went to the airport. He was narrow window of tolerance, chronic high sympathetic anxiety, not sleeping well, binging on sugar and Netflix, like really struggling to get his body under control, and his mind was running wild. He went to the airport. This is pre-COVID, actually. So it's been a year and a couple months since I met with him. He went to the airport to take a flight, tried a superventilation practice that he had seen online, and he had a full-blown panic attack in the airport, had to be taken, did not get on his flight, right? And now he has a new fear of flying. So it's important for us all to recognize that how we breathe creates how we feel, and how we feel in a certain environment will then carve neural patterns and associations with what we are seeing around us. If you have a panic attack in the grocery store while you're over breathing in a mask, you might carve an association with the mask or with crowds, start judging.
Or the grocery store.
The grocery store, exactly. And that's the way we're wired by design. So Wim Hof is that, all those practices, and I love them too. I just always teach that it's a very sharp blade, and you don't want to use it incorrectly.
No, not at all. And I think, one of the things that the way I kind of look at exactly what you've said, and you've kind of alluded to it, but if we look at the physiology of of that sympathetic state of being anxious, of being really kind of, flipped lid, as kind of you kind of mentioned in your skills of stress type thing. And you're constantly over breathing, and you've chronically long-term blown off so much CO2 that you end up like the smallest little exercise means that you have to breathe heavier through your mouth. The smallest little emotional, mental stress makes you overbreathe even more kind of autonomically. And so doing a practice that is, and I'm bashing on about this bloke and like whatever, who I was having the chat with, but a practice which is hyperventilation in nature is going to blow off more carbon dioxide.
Yep, than is being produced.
So we collectively are in a sympathetic state. We are in a place where our tolerance of carbon dioxide is shit.
Mm-hmm.
So then we go, well, actually, I've been told that doing this Wim Hof, this hyperventilation, superventilation, whatever you want to call it, is going to be amazing for my stress, for my anxieties, for whatever else. I'm going to go, all of a sudden I've blown off lots of carbon dioxide again. And yeah, I can then hold my breath for 3 minutes because I've got any carbon dioxide to trigger me to breathe. But I haven't in any way then learned to tolerate, as you guys at Shift call it, the stress molecule. We've in no way learnt to deal with the physiology of when we've out of this blissed state from where we've just gone into a severe hypoxia, i.e., for those of you who don't know what it means, i.e., we've got oxygen, we've got zero oxygen, well, bugger all oxygen, basically. The oxygen levels have gone right down, and you get this super trippy, super like dream-like, super like lightheaded,
tingly.
Yeah. People pass out quite often, and again, that's more conversations I've had on Instagram of people going, oh yeah, I pass out all the time. But from
a temporary buzz.
Yeah, exactly. But and then from the long term, actually dealing with the ability to cope with a stress, i.e., an increase in carbon dioxide, this kind of metabolic need, you've done no work towards that. Whereas,
well, yeah, it's so on the money, right? You can create this temporary buzz and bliss. It's really just excessive calcium and new red blood cells being created, and right. Yeah. So you can use that state, as Wim Hof has done so brilliantly, to then expose yourself to cold or some other stressor like hiking Kilimanjaro in the elements.
In your pants.
And it's incredible, right? So you can apply this tool to create specific adaptations in that state. When we start talking trauma healing, the problem with it is that trauma lives in the body in a different way. And in my experience, if somebody has unresolved trauma that's patterning some of this sympathetic overdrive, or that's resulting in avoidance and parasympathetic freeze states of depression and lethargy, overbreathing on purpose, superventilating of any kind, dynamic breath work, can induce a panic attack, as I've shared. I actually hear about that all the time.
Yeah.
So not only then are you carving a negative, you're not adapting to anything, right? You're actually blowing yourself out. But even if you do successfully, play with it and get a new max round of breath holds or push-ups when you're under that hypoxic state, whatever you do, those kinds of, that kind of edge work, as you just said so well, does little to help you address the psychological aspects and the felt sense of trauma and how it shows up in your life. Like I've worked with soft guys, special forces guys that I do exposure work and breath work with. And yes, it's satisfying to push it and hold your breath and be in the cold for long times. And I use some of these skills to help create some buy-in with a lot of care. I don't use it on everybody. But what I'm getting at is that it doesn't help them. If you don't do it right, it doesn't help them later to not have a trauma reaction to or a triggered activation reaction to, the sound of, a car backfiring that
Yeah.
sounds like a gun or an explosion, or crowds, or a certain smell of burning plastic or trash that reminds them of deployment. Like
Yeah.
those little sensory triggers in the limbic brain, just because we induce this amazing super ventilation response and we get a buzz and we can adapt to cold
Bliss
or
and
whatever, we get this amazing satisfying release, doesn't mean that we've reskilled ourselves in how to get the diaphragm to function properly, to relax, to dissipate the more subtle layers of trauma that are held. That requires more sensing and being to be with those areas and help consciously release them in my work.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I come from as well. With a lot of my work, I'm being referred people quite often these days. Many who have done some other breathing things, and a lot of them being superventilation, who are then kind of being sort of wigged out a bit and end up coming to me. And again, I'm going to go back to it just because it's another point which is how I work, I guess. But like in that kind of comment, the guy, I'd said taking a cool, calming, subtle, soft, quiet breath work is how I've had, that's how I've kind of worked with people. And that's given, for one, it's allowed a tolerance of carbon dioxide to be built. So i.e. we're kind of building that headspace, but then it's allowed for this, as you've kind of just said, that kind of sensed embodiment of understanding the triggers and the awareness and all of that. It's kind of the stuff which everyone avoids, if you like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of, that's the stuff which you don't, if you do a superventilation practice, to me, in my experience from it, I'm mainly talking, but you get buzzed out, you get blissed, you kind of get this cool, and it's really a strong practice. So therefore you're doing something other than being
Yes.
truly
Yeah.
in and with yourself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I look, dynamic, holotropic, there's some very cool practices that I know people have really had breakthroughs with. So I don't want to take that away from anybody. I think it's amazing. But, in the skill of stress, I start with read state before regulate for exactly this reason. You got to be able to read your own body and your own state before you apply a breath protocol. And if we're not teaching people to read things like diaphragm bracing, if your diaphragm is braced and your monkey mind's flipping out everywhere and you're tunnel visioned, maybe not the day to like induce a hypoxic state, right?
Yeah.
More of it. I've got a firefighter I'm working with who I love these guys because when they find a practice that they want to commit to, they're going to do it, right?
Yeah.
So he committed to hyperventilation practice for 30 days. And he's on day like 25 and he reached out because he feels like shit, he's like, it's not quote working. And
It was
so
so
we
good at the
broke down
beginning.
it was so good at the beginning, right? And this is a great way to develop an understanding for people who might be listening that want to share their breakthrough experiences with other people. It's like, it's the principles underneath this stuff, not the method, right? The method for him, he was devoted to a 30-day practice and he didn't want to quit. So what we looked at was, okay, what are the results? Well, his breath hold times have gotten worse in 25 days. His CO2 tolerance has gotten worse. He wears a Whoop band, so he's seeing his heart rate variability drop. His resting heart rate is rising. This is a person who's chronically stressed, exposed to trauma often, and sleep deprived. He does not need a daily superventilation practice to tick the box. So it took some grit, right, for me to say,
Yeah, right.
You're not failing by changing course. Don't grip like a bulldog to the 30-day practice or the method. Like, commit to your practice. Your practice needs to start with reading state. Let's read your state. Let's look at the data. Okay, now we're going to regulate. And then I was able to redesign his practice for the next 5 days to actually regulate and widen his window of tolerance. And then we're going to get him a new baseline to start looking at where he's activated in his trauma, because he has some. We all do, right?
Yeah. And that's
Yes.
what, and actually, like you were saying, they're having that whoop strap, having the ability. I mean, I'm lucky. The wife got me one, but it's one of those things of, for me, I don't really use it as. I think I love it. Like, it's cool to be able to see what the heart rate goes, but that's all stuff I've always been doing with my own check-in type thing. But for many people who aren't in that place, who read their state regularly, actually having that data, having those data points to kind of go, look, I'm telling you, this is probably not really working for you, but look, you can look at all of your data marks and you can see that over the 25 days, you've just been going
Been
in the wrong.
tanking.
Yeah, you've been going in the wrong direction. So it's not just my perspective of, actually, I don't think this is really, you could do this, would be a better one for you. It's not as big and sexy, but it's not,
Exactly.
and actually you can kind of go, well, look, all of these points, let's see if we can get them to go up with some soft, calm, quiet, cooling stuff, or whatever it might be, and then we can go from there.
Yeah.
And
yeah. It's not sexy. That's the problem. Is that
exactly, it's
not
shit on
sexy.
Instagram. It's
Way
really
more fun. It's like way more fun to induce some tingles and measure your
some
breath.
passing outs and
And I love cold exposure. I love
yeah.
that. I am so happy that I have a way, at the end of the day, we're talking about inducing stress to induce some adaptations.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to adapt if you're blowing out of your window of tolerance. What are you wanting to adapt to, really? Like, what kind of outcomes are you really looking for? Because, exercise, cold exposure, Wim Hof, all kinds of other dynamic breathing, holotropic breathing, even psychedelics, these tools can be escape, just escape. If they're not applied with intention and guidance, and that reading your own body first, like, where am I starting from? And where do I actually need to go to feel better, be better, right?
I think for me, like, we haven't really mentioned the shift thing at all, I guess. I came across you via the Shift Adapt kind of guys and the site, and you had done is it called Releasing Trauma webinar? Was that what it's called? Or
Beyond Trauma?
Beyond Trauma, that's it. Yeah, it was the Beyond Trauma webinar, and because I'm a member, like, the webinars are recorded, you can watch them. So I kind of watched it, not live, and I was like, oh my God, like, it just, that's how this whole thing started, really, because you just like collect. But the thing I love about the work that you guys do at Shift is exactly what you've just kind of said 2 or 3 times in your last couple of monologues, was like, it's all about the principles. It's all about, let physiology first. Let's go back to that. Like, let's get the principles down pat. And actually, at one point I did my Oxygen Advantage training, and I've kind of studied with Patrick 2 or 3 times, kind of doing those, which is cool. And I do really like it. And there's some really, really useful tools in it. But again, that's kind of then almost gone the other way of, there's no stepping things up, essentially. There's no superventilation. There's no, I don't know, gears, as you kind of, you guys use them at Shift, like the breath gears and things like that. So when I started following Brian and you and Rob, and like listening to you, and it was just kind of like, there's
room for all of it.
There's room for all of it. And actually all of this stuff which Patrick teaches, and that guy knows his shit, like Patrick McEwen, like, he properly knows his shit. But he's kind of coming from a potato background, and actually he's really like open about his, that was what his training is for so many years. And it does influence, obviously, it's kind of difficult for that stuff, if you've been doing it for 25 years, not to constantly influence you. But when you suddenly begin to understand the principles of a practice, of the physiology of what you're trying to do with a breath hold, whether it be a breath hold at the top of your breath or a breath hold at the bottom of your breath, whichever kumbhaka you're kind of trying to do in a yogic term, or whether you're trying to inhale really hard and then exhale really soft, or inhale really short and exhale really long. Understanding your physiology, as you said in one of your first speeches, like, you breathe in, it speeds things up. You breathe out, it slows things down. That beginning to get a basic understanding of that stuff, even just that on its own, can be mind-blowing and game-changing if you're someone who can watch themselves and go, holy fuck, I'm breathing really fast. Okay, if I'm breathing really fast,
not moving, right?
What can I do for that?
Yeah, there's room for all of it. The gears that those cats have coined and developed, plus kind of the work that I've done with window of tolerance training, pranayama patterns, like deep grooves of breath control and breath manipulation over time to create different states, right? When we kind of put our work together, what I love about it is we've got a framework for people to take it where they want to go. There's no wrong. It's like, if you are flooded out and on the couch and you're not feeling life run through you anymore, like, we need to help you read that and understand where you are without any moral judgment to it. Like, this is a natural part of the human condition. Here's how you can meet the breath skillfully to start to wake things up, to feel alive again. And there might be like sympathetic practices that are appropriate. So we teach it all and try to scale it and progress it so that people can, exactly what you said, like nail down this sense of their own physiology so that they're the active participants. They're not just being told to do something and then, promising outcomes from that. It's a practice.
Yeah. And I think, that's kind of one of the things you guys, I can pretty much listen to you, like you three, whatever you're doing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've literally just been walking the dogs and been smashing like the last 4 episodes of Brian and Rob's like little podcasts that they do. Man, they just fucking make me die. It's like just like the most inane conversations, but there's so much gold in it as well. There's so much kind of, I mean, their knowledge base is pretty solid. So it's always good to pick up on. But you've mentioned a couple of times about some of your work with vets, and I'd kind of love to pick up on that in just a few minutes if possible, because I know you work with a bunch of people from the UK, and like it'd be really interesting to kind of perhaps dive into some of the PTSD a little bit. I know that's obviously a huge fucking subject, but we'll just nip into that. That'll be fine. But I guess before we dive that, I kind of just want to go into a little bit when we were just talking about some of that stuff, and I guess the physiology of breathing and ways in which we can control. Maybe control. I'll use that word for now. If another better word comes up, I'll change it. I won't, because I can't be bothered to edit that kind of shit out or this. But so obviously we kind of, certainly my practice, and I'm probably fairly certain in yours, kind of nasal breathing is, the go-to starting place in many ways to kind of try to re-regulate things a bit. I know, I'm sure most people have heard me bang on about it enough, but just briefly, from your perspective around physiology and whatever else, taking a bit of a nasal breathing practice, even if that's just where you were to start, what's kind of your thoughts and whatever else in and around that?
Well, I can combine that with the work I do with veterans really beautifully, because I work with Challenge Aspen military opportunities. That's the longest standing group that I've worked with since 2005, I think. Wow. And before that, in 2003, I was working with several private clients that were part of Challenge Aspen's ecosystem. These are people who've been through paralysis or visual impairment. I had a young man high on the autism spectrum who I actually was his breath coach back in 2000. I don't even remember when, but kind of learning from people that have physical and cognitive challenges or chronic pain and combat trauma to apply breath and somatic techniques to, again, participate with their own body. And that has had all kinds of tremendous outcomes, from helping a lot of people I've worked with have reduced medication dependencies, not because medications are all bad, but because now they have another way to regulate state that actually has really good side effects. And one of those side effects is they learn how to read what their body needs in real time, and either reduce dosage with the help of their doctor, right? I'm not a doctor, so
Yeah.
I always preface that with like, hey, this is your body, here's one other way that you can engage with it. So with the nasal breathing, because I work with a lot of pain and anxiety and depression, I always kind of coyote teach it through experience. And I give people a lot of permission to exhale through the mouth and teach the gear system early, so they understand that they're not bad or wrong. If that pressure valve is there and they need to off gas, like, here's why you're feeling that, and let's explore that. You can either create that sensation metabolically by turning uphill and going as fast as you can, or we can sit here and breathe that way without even thinking about anything, and you'll start to overbreathe, right? We can induce it. Or we can think about a past trauma activation. We can go get in a crowd or into some cold to induce that breathing, right? So I teach the gears, and then I love teaching how, at least on the nasal inhale, that suction and pressure allows us to fill the lungs in the lower cavity of the lung tissue, and how intelligent that tissue is, that just by moving horizontally with the lower ribs with nasal breathing, especially, or at least on the inhale, we are changing the chemical nature of shallow, rapid breathing, where that lower lung tissue is dripping hormones that are cooling and calming: melatonin, tryptophan, dopamine, serotonin. And like, the lights go on to realize, like, remember all those little white pills that are sitting, or blue pills, whatever color, like, that are just
not blue ones, not over here.
Uptake. Yeah, just trying to get you to uptake some serotonin. I got free drugs for you in your nasal breath, right? This is a free way to change your state. And we make it really experiential. I love our archery program for that reason, because the bow does a lot of the work for me.
Definitely want to touch on that one, because that's something which I keep seeing you doing, and man, it makes me, I really want to go and shoot some bows and arrows.
Dude, you're a punk rocker. I can't believe you haven't.
I know. I know, ridiculous.
It's such a punk activity, but when I go to the range, I see a bunch of you guys out there.
Yeah, I think the UK is probably a bit different. You guys are, you're a bit more outdoorsy than us over in the UK. So with that, because I know obviously, and I guess this is, it's probably why in many ways, but there's a whole kind of Zen practice of Zen archery, which in many ways probably is exactly physiologically what you're doing with the archery and with your kind of clients.
Well, the bow enforces it, it demands it, and it's marksmanship. So for working with veterans, it's a really fun, powerful way to light up parts of the body and brain in something that we want to be doing, and I think that that's a huge part of healing. It's finding something. It doesn't have to be archery, right? But finding something that you like to physically do that invites and hopefully demands the breath, right?
Because, sorry, just briefly, because if you're just, I'm gonna tease it at you, but like with the breath and archery, I'm gonna assume, I think I know anyway, but I'll assume, like, if you've got no fucking breath control, if your breath is all over the shot, like if you're sharp, shallow, kind of auxiliary muscle breathing, like you just haven't got a hope in hell of going anywhere near target.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a present time risky thing. You're holding a weapon, you're drawing back this pressure and force against this arrow. That's a weapon. It's a hunting weapon, and It can slay foam or straw, but it can hurt people. Even if you misfire that, the string can hit your arm and create a pretty strong welt. Like, so I love it because it's gonna invite present time embodiment and awareness. You got to wake up, you got to show up. And if you're not organizing your breath, then just the physical act of holding tension in the bow, and then the brain activity of creating a sight picture and having a calm shot process goes out the window. So the breath doesn't lie. If you're not organizing your breath and managing your oxygen and your nervous system, you're going to have shakes. You're going to have a blurry sight picture. You're going to be nervous and force the shot instead of release it. And any little imposition, a twitch, a nervous system gripping, like tension in the front hand, shows up in the shot. You actually have to have like relaxed tension and presence with breath control to achieve a successful shot.
Yeah.
So it's just been the biggest gift for my own meditation and training. And I love it.
I do remember even before like I was ever into any of this, when I used to be an air cadet, so like the Air Force cadets type thing. And
you did?
Yeah. I was about, I want to do like 4 years of that or something. I was nearly going to join the forces at one point, and then I went to New Zealand, became a bit of a bum instead. But we used to obviously shoot like 2.2s on the in the rifle range. I think there were 2.2s anyway. I could be wrong. I can't really remember. It's like 20 years ago. But it was, or even then, like the control of the breath. So it's kind of you take the shot like at the end of your exhale. It's like, and you kind of feel that calm, that cool, that stillness, and then you pull the trigger. And it's funny, isn't it? You kind of think such a potentially aggressive, dangerous practice in many wrong hands, but actually it's quite a tool to teach that side of presence, of calm, of quiet, of stillness.
Yeah, and not just for the sake of it. It's just a hard sell, right?
Yeah.
And if you sell it that way, you're often tying it to being fucked up. Like, you need to chill out. You need to go to the yoga studio and listen to this chick and figure out how to like, no, let's go have some fun and let's be outside and let's set up jamboree, and there's always, every day is different. Sometimes personally, my practice feels great. And then another day, I can't shoot from 40 in a way that I'm happy.
But isn't that just an exact, isn't that like a perfect analogy for like, your CO2 tolerance, your general headspace from a day-to-day basis for, I get people who are doing breath work with me, and they get really like, I get messages saying they're like how fucking annoyed they are because they have, I don't know, like yesterday their CO2 tolerance was 52 and it had been going in the right direction for the last 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, today, and it's back down to 40, and it's kind of like, well, how did you sleep? And it was like, I had a fucking terrible night's sleep, and the baby was up, or I just, whatever it might be, my back was playing up. And it's kind of like, well, that stuff is going to affect your nervous system. Like that stuff is going to have an immediate response to how you respond to everything.
Yeah, it's a new moment, right? Today is a new moment, and we can't really attach ourselves to outcomes. The data is fun and it's a great teaching tool, right? But having a practice,
it's good for buy-ins.
Like it's great, and it has its downfall, of course. Like people get super attached to it, but I love what you're bringing forward there, because it's just like life, and it's like people I've talked to that are into pottery. some days they can center, fall away, it's all over the place, and
that's amazing.
It flinging all over the studio. So it's like you have to just really to have something that is real, that has some risk involved, to wake us up to the moment. For me, that used to be rivers. I think medical work can be like that. I know it has its difficulties, and emotional, trauma to see people suffering. But what I liked about my brief time working the ambulance was similarly, it's like, you don't step into the same river twice. It's a new day.
Yeah.
You got to show up with what you've got and do your best and learn from it, move
Yeah.
on. Like,
Yeah.
don't attach to outcomes is huge.
Well, I think in the medical world, certainly we you certainly learn just a bit of a sense of humor with some of that as a way to kind of, laugh something off. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of these two things. Like I was read in my class last night that, or this morning, I think it might have been, that Alan Watts once said that much of the secret of life consists of knowing how to laugh and also how to breathe, which to me was like perfect. Do you know what I mean? How can you laugh and can you breathe? If you can do those two things, if things are going shit, you can still have a laugh. And if you can, if things are going well, your breath is going to be probably perfect, I guess. So
he just delivers.
he just delivers. Yeah.
Well, I wish that I had the, speaking of that humor that I know you guys in the hospital develop, and these frontline people too, it's amazing, the camaraderie and the sick humor that you need to get by, but it's in the right place, right? It's coming from the right place. But you Brits and my UK veterans that I work with have me on my heels all the time. I can't keep up. They're so fun. It's like a DNA thing over there. Like there's just so much.
Have you seen our weather?
Yeah, that's what it is.
We've got no fucking choice. You've got to have like a dark sense of humor and constantly doing something. Just when you're living in like 9 months of perpetual gray, like
maybe that's what it is. Something in the water, something in the weather. But there is it's so fun to kind of get saturated in culture like that, and the Blesma they call themselves the limbless veterans of the UK. So
right, cool.
Blesma is the group, and they are, from Scotland and all over, Wessex and England and Wales and everywhere. And I've never been there. So
you got to, as soon as lockdown's over, you need to come over and we'll go for some van life.
Let's do a van tour. You meet some of these unbelievable human beings that I've been getting to know through Blesma that have been, enduring this COVID with some unique circumstances. Some of them have really high needs, and they're all either amputees or have complete loss of use of certain limbs. And so, having that camaraderie and humor. Yeah, I think that's what I'm most looking forward to as things open up from COVID. Is like, we need each other,
Yeah.
We all need each other. Most of the healing I see in these veterans groups doesn't come from anything that I'm doing, because I'm just showing them some tricks with their body that they can practice, but it comes from them, being together, being seen, being understood.
I think that's
it's profound. Acknowledgement is profound.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things. I mean, I'm not going to be able to remember it, but I'm working my way through Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky at the moment, sort of, which is obviously all stress and, how, our glucocorticoids and all that stuff, all of these, cortisol, how that's affecting us. And there's a whole chunk of it about community and, and just the stress of isolation and whatever else. And, I think hopefully, perhaps this is where, like we said at the beginning, like the work we do online on Instagram and stuff like that, and hopefully, minus the big and sexy, if you can make people get it and see it, is actually, there's some, as hard as some of these times are, at least there is some tools that people can use and begin to implement to, we are finally now just coming out of lockdown-ish. The pubs are open today, so that's all. The Brits are happy the pubs are open. But, I know. But prior to that, having some tools to, and as you've kind of gone into, like being able to read your own state and then having those tools in isolation to go, okay, this is how I feel, but I can then use a bunch of these bits and pieces that I've learned to kind of, to hopefully adapt to fit a physiological change to re-educate your state, I guess, or restate yourself.
Yeah, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, man, for sure. So I've kind of just started doing this at the end of these things. By all means, like, you know, tell me to fuck off and say you don't want to do it, because I forgot to tell you I was going to ask you to do it. But
fuck off, Wibbs.
It's a good job. Like everyone knows, if they listen to my podcast, I swear an awful lot, so it's all good. But you like, can you like simple, relatively quick, a simple tool that perhaps someone can take away and just begin to, I don't know, feel their state, or begin to, you know, downshift, upshift, you know, something that would be relatively open to all, but just something that they can perhaps take away?
One of my favorite practices is just, I call it the reset technique. And it involves just finishing an exhale and listening for the next breath. And it's a great way to reset the internal chemistry of your breathing and to start participating with breath control and awareness without a heavy hand, right? So it's a great teaching tool. So rather than taking a big breath, you just kind of receive the inhale, give the exhale all the way to the bottom, and then reset. Just listen there. And the inhale might come right away, or you might just feel all of a sudden an awareness that it's really nice to be empty. Like, so you're not forcing a pause, you're just listening. Yeah. That's one of my favorites.
So it'd be just normal inhale.
Yep.
And then exhaling out.
Now just listen. Inhale might come right away. But can you actually engage with this incredible moment that you're given a breath, and then receive it like the gift that it is, because you engaged with its arrival?
What you get, what I got, I mean, one of the things that's so easy to notice with that is that lateral expansion. Like when it just when you're suddenly not forcing, when you're not, it's just all of a sudden your body goes, oh, I'll just draw from here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Because you're receiving, right? The paradox there, not taking a breath, just be there for it.
Because yeah, I like that. I'll remember that one. Amazing. Right. Well,
that's it.
That's what I reckon. That's kind of just probably just over the hour, so I'm trying not to get people to be too bored too quickly on these. Later down the line, I plan on like good 4-hour kind of Joe Rogan style. Like,
oh man, I'm glad you got me in here early then.
I want to make sure that we kind of do the when they get to 4 hours, we're doing it face to face, so we can do it with, like, you know, whiskey and food and whatnot. But yeah.
Oh, cool. I look forward to the time we're all together face to face, and in the meantime, we can share on Insta and beyond. And
totally.
Thank you so much for getting the words and the voices out.
With that in mind, I just need you to tell everyone where they can find you.
Okay. So I'm a teacher at shiftadapt.com. I have the Skill of Stress course there, and I teach neuronidra there and elsewhere, but that's really the hub of my work is at Shift. And my Instagram handle is intrinsic_way.
I'm going to put all of this in the notes anyway, so just so people can hear it.
There you go.
Sweet. Amazing. Well, thank you for that. I loved it. It was kind of super chilled and relaxed. So and I definitely recommend you guys go and check Emily's work in the neuronidra stuff, because most of you, if you've ever done practice with me, you know I like teaching yoga nidra too. Emily's got some great, which we didn't even touch on, which we could do next time, I guess, but some great stuff around kind of the neuroscience and whatnot of yoga nidra. So they're really freaking cool. So go and check those out. And then her Skills of Stress work is amazing as well. So definitely go and check those out, and go follow her on Instagram, because she's rad, and she'll definitely say hi, especially if you say, I sent you. So
VIP.
yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Emily, and I can't wait to catch up soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Wibbs.
Cheers. Bye.